I was still wearing my black suit for my wife's funeral when 3 police cars rolled into my driveway. The house smelled like cold coffee and grief. My hands shook a little as I pulled the curtain back. I expected silence and space to breathe after burying my wife of 28 years. Instead, I got flashing lights, and the one person in this valley I prayed I'd never see again. Vivian Thornell stepped out of the front squad car like she was Grand Marshal of her own parade. HOA president, self-appointed Queen of Pines Ridge, professional hater of anything not made of concrete or scented candles. She wore a smile sharp enough to cut skin and carried a stack of papers like trophies she planned on mounting on my wall. Deputy Martinez followed behind her, hat in hand, moving slow like he wished he could dissolve into the gravel. His belt jingled with handcuffs, and the early afternoon air smelled of wet leaves and engine fumes. "Mr. Callahan," he said, voice rough with discomfort. "I'm real sorry about the timing here, but we've got a court order saying this corn operation is illegal." "Illegal? My corn, on my land." "On the week I buried the woman who built this farm with me." I stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked the same way it had for decades under Sarah's feet. "My family owns 200 acres of rolling fields, oak groves, and the sweetest soil in Miller County. 40 acres of it is corn. Real corn. Not the decorative kind. These HOA folks stick in porch baskets for aesthetic fall vibes." But Vivian didn't care about land, history, or decency. Her nails glinted like tiny knives as she flipped her papers and smirked. "This agricultural activity violates community safety standards," she announced, her voice cold and crisp like winter air. "Your equipment is too close to residential property. Children live here, Mr. Callahan. Children who didn't exist when my grandfather planted the first rows on this land." I stared at her. My gut twisted, not with fear but disbelief. She waited until my wife's body was in the ground before attacking. Sarah had been gone for exactly 3 weeks. Her camera still sat on the kitchen table with a memory card halfway full of wildflower pictures. The place still smelled faintly like the cinnamon bread she used to bake. And this woman thought today was the day to seize my cornfield. The sound of car doors opening made me look up. Neighbors from Pines Ridge lined the sidewalk. Filming with phones like this was entertainment. Some whispered. Some pointed. A few looked guilty, but none stepped forward. "This is private property," I said, my voice rough from grief and sleep deprivation. "My family has worked this land for a century." Vivian didn't flinch. "And the HOA has rights too. We warned you. The noise. The equipment. The smell." "The smell?" I repeated. "Corn dust." She sniffed, like it was a biohazard. I almost laughed. Almost. The air was thick with the scent of soil after last night's rain. It mixed with diesel from my tractor, and the fading perfume still stuck to the collar of my funeral jacket. My heart ached so hard it felt like bruised bone. Behind me, through the porch screen, I could see Sarah's favorite mug sitting in the dish rack. She used to sip coffee at dawn, barefoot, looking over the fields she loved. Every morning she said the same thing. "Ezra, promise me we'll never sell this land to those developers." I promised. Now the HOA wanted to take pieces of it while they smiled in my face. Deputy Martinez rubbed the back of his neck. His discomfort was practically a smell in the air. "Look, Ezra, I don't like this. The timing ain't right." But she brought the paperwork. "She brought the paperwork," Vivian echoed, smug, like she was reciting scripture. I walked down the steps until I was inches from her overpriced perfume. "Vivian, my wife died 21 days ago. And you're here threatening to take the field she loved more than anything." Her smile didn't budge. She tapped her papers. "You should have followed regulations, Mr. Callahan. Actions have consequences." The cold wind blew her perfect hair into her perfect face. For a second, I saw something behind her eyes. Not pity, never that, but hunger, a kind of greed you can smell. Sharp, metallic, and suddenly it clicked. This wasn't about noise or kids or corn dust. She wanted my land. My entire eastern cornfield sat beside her development like a jewel she couldn't afford, and she knew I was vulnerable, alone, grieving. But she didn't know something important. My family didn't just farm this valley, we owned it. All of it. The title, The Old Water Rights. The forgotten agreements buried deep in county archives, land deeds older than half the houses in this town. And in exactly 7 minutes, she was going to learn that she'd picked a fight with the one man she should have left alone. Because when life rips everything you love away, you stop being polite. You start fighting back. And I was done letting anyone break the last promise I made to my wife. To protect our home. The moment those squad cars pulled away, gravel crunching under their tires, the whole valley felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. The kind of silence that comes before a tornado rips your roof off. I stood on the porch, hands trembling against the railing Sarah used to wrap in Christmas lights every winter. My breath came out in sharp little bursts, fogging in the cool air. Vivian wasn't done. I could feel it like pressure in my chest. Sure enough, an hour later, the first blow landed. A certified letter thick enough to bruise a mailbox. I tore it open at the kitchen table, next to Sarah's old apron still hanging on the chair. The paper smelled like cold toner and bad intentions. It was a formal complaint filed by the HOA, claiming my, quote, commercial agricultural operation endangered residents and violated buffer zone laws. Commercial. Lady, I was growing corn, not running a factory. But buried in the legal nonsense was the part meant to scare me. Their hired lawyer, a bulldog named Howard Griggs, was pushing for emergency remediation and possible land seizure. I felt something in my chest twist. Anger, grief, and something darker. I grabbed my keys, the old metal jangling just like Deputy Martinez's cuffs earlier, and headed for the county records office. If I didn't get ahead of this, they'd strip the land right out from under me. The records building sat behind the courthouse, smelling like dust, ink, and decades of forgotten arguments. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing like tired bees. Inside, at her cluttered desk, sat the one person I prayed was working today. Miss Danielle Hayes, 60 years old, thick glasses, sweaters that smelled like cedar, a soft voice and sharp brain. She'd worked county archives longer than most of us had been alive. The moment she looked up, her expression softened. Ezra, honey, I'm real sorry about your loss. I swallowed hard. Thanks. I need help. Something's happening with the HOA. I think they're trying to steal part of the farm. Her eyes narrowed behind those giant lenses. Show me! I laid the papers out. She didn't even blink. She snatched them up with librarian speed precision and marched across the room like she smelled something rotten. 5 minutes later, she was hauling out old survey maps, deeds, aerial photos from the 60s. The musty smell of old paper filled the room as she spread everything across a metal table. Ezra, she whispered, tapping a faded aerial photograph. Look at these lines. I leaned close. The photo showed the valley before any development. My family's original boundaries stretched farther than even I remembered. When I compared it to the HOA's new survey map, the difference jumped out like a bruise. Their property lines had crept inward, toward my land, dozens of feet. That's not natural drift, Danielle muttered. Somebody fudged these surveys. My heart thudded. They moved the lines. Oh, they moved them, she confirmed, and badly. Whoever did this didn't expect anyone to check the old records. I gripped the photos so hard the edges bent, the smell of mildew mixed with my rising rage. They weren't just lying, they were stealing. And they timed it for after Sarah's funeral, when they thought I wouldn't be paying attention. Danielle shuffled through more documents, pushing up her glasses. See this clause here? She said, pointing at the original Valley Agreement. Your great-grandfather secured agricultural protections on all this land, including buffer zones. HOA rules don't override county agricultural exemptions. What does that mean? I asked. It means, she said with a tight little smile, their entire complaint just turned into toilet paper. Relief mixed with fury. I knew Vivian wanted my land. But this was surgical. Precise. She had planned this long before today. I left the building with a folder full of truth and a storm growing behind my eyes. But when I got back home, the real shock hadn't even arrived yet. Marcus Turner, my friend since high school, owner of the Valley Auto Shop, was waiting on my porch. His worn denim jacket smelled like gasoline and cinnamon gum, his nervous habit. His foot tapped like a piston. "Easy," he said, voice tight. "You need to see this." He shoved his phone in my hand. Screenshots of a Facebook group filled the screen. Pines Ridge Parents. Every post was a slap in the face. Dangerous farmer, endangering our kids. Unstable widower. Tractor leaking chemicals. Cornfield, too close to property lines. There were pictures, too. Dark, dramatic shots of my tractor from low angles. Photos of my irrigation system taken like it was some industrial monster. Posts dripping with fake concern. Then one post stopped my breath. A picture taken inside my woods, on my wife's favorite walking trail. Timestamp, 11 p.m. Wednesday, 2 days after the funeral. She was on my land, I whispered, heat crawling up my neck. Marcus nodded, jaw clenched. More than that. Some HOA folks snuck across your property line to take these. They're trying to build an evidence file. My head buzzed with fury. My throat felt tight. I could almost smell Sarah's favorite wildflowers crushed under their footsteps. These people were walking on the trails she loved, the ones she took pictures on during her chemo days. They waited until she was gone to swarm like vultures. A sound echoed deep in the woods, metal hitting dirt. I froze. Marcus froze too. What was that? We followed the sound. Leaves crunched beneath our boots. The smell of earth and pine filled the air. Then we saw them. Fresh survey stakes. Dozens. Bright orange ribbons flapping in the breeze like warning flags. Newly hammered into Sarah's trails. My trails. My land. Each one a theft in progress. Someone had marked a whole section of my woods as HOA improvements. It felt like claws scraping through my ribs. "This ain't about noise," Marcus whispered. "They're prepping a land grab." My chest burned. My pulse hammered. I looked at those stakes and felt a switch flip inside me. Not grief, not fear, resolve. They thought I was alone. Broken. Distracted. But they didn't know the truth. My family didn't just own farmland. We owned history. Rights. Boundaries. Legal power older than any HOA in this country. And tomorrow, I was going to start tearing their entire plan apart. Stake by stake, lie by lie. The next morning cracked open with a sky the color of steel and a wind sharp enough to sting. I walked the ridge behind my barn with a thermos of coffee, watching the sunrise spread over the valley Sarah loved. Her trails, her trees, her cornfield. My jaw tightened. I wasn't letting anyone take this place. Not now. Not ever. By 8 a.m. the valley was already buzzing, not with tractors or birds, but with HOA people marching around like they owned the earth under their sneakers. They had cameras, clipboards, safety vests, like some kind of suburban SWAT team. I spotted them planting more community improvement signs deep inside my woodline. Mulch bags, benches, landscaping tools, all staged for photos to prove their maintenance of land that wasn't theirs. Exactly the kind of fraudulent activity needed for an adverse possession claim. I felt my stomach twist. They were turning my wife's walking trails, her last peaceful refuge during chemo, into a legal weapon. Then I heard the familiar crunch of tires on gravel. Marcus's truck rolled up, smelling like coffee and diesel. He hopped out, his usual nervous tapping even louder today. "Ezra," he said, voice tight, "you better come see this. You ain't gonna like it." He pulled out his phone. Another HOA group message. Screenshots, instructions, coordinated times. Document at 10 a.m. Plant shrubs near disputed line. Get photos of neglected areas. Stay on message. Farmer is unstable. Make sure kids visible in photos for safety narrative. My chest burned. My vision pulsed hot around the edges. "They're using kids," I muttered. "Sarah would have—" I couldn't even finish the sentence. Marcus clapped a hand on my shoulder, his grip solid. "We're not letting this happen. Rebecca's expecting us." Attorney Rebecca Swift wasn't just sharp. She was a chainsaw wrapped in a business suit. When she opened her office door, the smell of burnt coffee and printer ink smacked us in the face. Her desk was covered in documents, maps, and a stack of highlighted legal code that could choke a horse. "You ready to bury them?" she asked. "I've been ready," I said. "What did Danielle find?" Rebecca's smile widened. "Oh, Ezra, you're going to love this." She pulled out a thin, yellow document from 1985, the Whispering Pines Valley Development Agreement. Buried inside was the ticking bomb, a land banking clause. Thornell Development had first right of refusal for properties within a 5-mile radius, but only until January 1st, less than 6 weeks away. If they didn't secure adjacent land by then, the agreement died forever. Vivian wasn't attacking my farm out of spite. She was on a deadline. "She needs your land," Rebecca said. "Without it, her development collapses. She's desperate. That's why she hit you right after the funeral. She saw an opening." My pulse thundered. It all made sense now. The complaints, the lawsuits, the cops, the fake photos, the midnight stake moving. This wasn't harassment. It was a countdown. "And here's the other piece," Rebecca said, sliding another paper forward. "Your great-great-grandfather owned this entire valley in 1918. The county never had the right to grant development access to half of these parcels." My breath caught. "Meaning?" I asked. "Meaning," she said, eyes sparkling with a kind of righteous fire. "Their entire development is standing on legally invalid ground. And you, my friend, have the power to tear the whole thing down." Quote, I leaned back in my chair as the weight of it hit me. Sarah's trails, my fields, our legacy, protected by laws older than any HOA. But the best was still coming. Rebecca tapped her folder. "Oh, and one more thing. Federal investigators have been watching the HOA for weeks. They're waiting for Vivian to make her next move. And trust me, she's about to." I didn't have to wait long. The next morning at 7:23 a.m., Vivian delivered the final nail into her own coffin. A 911 call, a full-blown fabricated environmental emergency. She claimed I was spraying toxic chemicals in a grief-induced breakdown, threatening the entire valley's water supply. The sirens arrived fast. Fire trucks, hazmat teams, ambulances, patrol cars. It looked like a disaster movie set built right on my gravel driveway. The air filled with diesel fumes, the clatter of gear, and confused shouts. Hazmat teams combed my field with equipment so sensitive it could detect a spilled cup of gasoline. They found nothing. Inspector Janet Morrison shook her head. "This farm is cleaner than the riverfront park downtown. Whoever called this in is either ignorant or intentionally lying." Vivian strutted forward like she was starring in her own victory show, waving a court order. "Except," Rebecca stepped in, her voice slicing the air. "Mrs. Thornell, this order is signed by Judge Harrison Morris." Vivian smiled like a snake. "Correct." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Interesting, because Judge Harrison Morris died 6 months ago." The silence shattered. Deputy Martinez stepped closer, face tight with anger. "Ma'am, are you presenting falsified court documents to law enforcement?" Vivian stammered. "Backed up." Looked around for support. Not a single HOA member stepped forward. Then 3 people emerged from the perimeter. Plain clothes, serious faces. Badges flashed. FBI. Agent Thompson spoke calmly, almost kindly. "Vivian Thornell, you are under arrest for wire fraud, filing false emergency reports, conspiracy, boundary manipulation, and attempted land theft." The handcuffs clicked around her wrists. The sound echoed across my cornfield like justice itself. Neighbors recorded everything. Channel 8 News caught it live. Marcus whispered, "Sarah's smiling today, buddy." That night they held an emergency county meeting. Packed wall to wall, standing room only. Farmers, teachers, old-timers, even some former HOA folks who now saw the truth. Commissioner Wells looked shaken as she said, "This community owes Mr. Callahan an apology." But it wasn't about apologies. It was about what came next. Rebecca stood tall, her voice steady. "We move to revoke the development rights, permanently, and repair every stolen inch of land." The room erupted. When they asked me to speak, I wore Sarah's cornflower blue tie. I told the truth. About grief. About land. About honesty. About neighbors who stand together. And about a woman who underestimated a farmer who had nothing left to lose. In the end, the valley didn't just win. It healed. Vivian went to federal prison. Thornell Development collapsed. Stolen land was returned to families who'd nearly lost everything. Sarah's trails were turned into a protected nature preserve in her name. And the Cornfield Valley became a community again, not a battleground. Every morning, I sit on the porch with coffee and watch the sun rise over the fields. The corn rustles in the breeze like whispered memories.